My name is Grace Petrie, and I am from Leicester in the UK, in the middle of England. I identify as a lesbian and a cis woman. My pronouns are she, her. I identify as queer in all forms. My latest album is called Connectivity, and it came out in late 21 in the UK, and it was a collection of songs written sort of during and sort of about the lockdown. I'll be touring Australia between the 27th of December and the 22nd of January. I'm starting at Woodford Folk Festival, and I'm going all the way down the East Coast, hopping over to Adelaide and doing Tasmania as well. So lots of Aussie shows. You can find me online at Grace Petrie on Twitter, Grace Petrie Music on Instagram, Grace Petrie Music on TikTok, Grace Petrie on Facebook, and anywhere that you Google Grace Petrie, you should find my website and more information than you could possibly need, I'm sure.
Well, welcome to LOTL Media and Queer Conversation. In the studio with me is Grace Petrie. Grace, you just arrived from the UK and you are in sunny Queensland right now. So welcome back to Australia.
Thank you very much.
When did you arrive?
I actually arrived on Christmas Day, which was quite a surreal experience to have a sort of very jet-lagged Christmas in obviously what's the middle of summer for you guys. So we left the winter behind on Christmas Eve and landed in Brisbane at sort of 6 o'clock on Christmas Day. So very strange journey.
And you are coming back to finish something off that you couldn't finish last time. Tell us about that.
Yes, absolutely. So my return to Australia has been delayed by obviously the pandemic, which sort of kicked off the last time I was here. The first time I ever toured Australia was in February 2020, and I had an absolutely amazing time. I had incredible shows. I had wonderful, gorgeous, really generous audiences. Fell in love with the country, fell in love with the people, fell in love with the venues, and I was so happy that it had gone so well. I was already in the middle of planning my next trip before I'd even returned, and suddenly the virus hit and the rest of the tour was cancelled. And my fiddle player and I, we had to fly home on an emergency flight straight into lockdown. And so that was the inauspicious ending to our first Australian tour. So it's really, really nice to be back and to feel like we're kind of getting to finish some things that we were stopped from doing the first time around.
And in that time, you've written your latest EP that's out, Connectivity. You wrote that throughout lockdown, is that right?
Right, yeah. So it was a bit of a response to the lockdown and a response to not being able to perform live, and I think it was a very inspiring time in some ways as a songwriter, because I was very struck by the idea that this was the first time in my life that the entire world really was united in the same experience. Everyone in the world was touched by the coronavirus, but the experience of being united by one event was, in practice, that we were all completely isolated from each other. So that juxtaposition between being completely isolated but all going through the same thing on our own in our own little spaces, I thought was really interesting, and inspired quite a lot of songwriting.
You've been a singer-songwriter for almost 20 years, not quite 20 years. I think you started in 2006. Mm-hmm. And you've done and produced quite a few albums. You don't want to be known as a political or as a protest singer, while that was probably a very important part in your life. How have things changed over 20 years?
In some ways, I think... in some ways, I feel like I've become less political as a songwriter, and in some ways, I feel like I've become more political as a songwriter. I think the reason that I find a political songwriter is a strange term is because it sort of assumes that I don't believe there can be any apolitical art. I think politics touches everything. Politics touches the way that we live, in a million ways every day. And we write art, we write songs, we make art about the way that we're living. We make art about our lives. So for me, I think that can't really be divorced from politics. But I also think, I suppose, I used to write in a much more sort of topical, immediate way. So when I first started writing songs, I was writing things that are about the headlines that day. And these days, I suppose I'm writing kind of more longer term, I suppose, philosophical, ideological ideas sort of influence my songs a bit more than they did when I was younger, I suppose. I'm slowing down.
your latest album, do you find that it's quite different from your other albums, or is that still within your style?
I would say that the latest album is in some ways I feel like it is quite different, because as a songwriter I've always sort of trialed and perfected songs on the road. You know, that's very much the way that I write. I'll perform an early draft, you know, quite early on in the process, and I'll tweak it and change it, and you know, it'll develop as I gig it. And obviously there was no option to do that in lockdown, so I was really sort of, I felt like the side of me that is a performer, which is very much where I'm naturally at home, is on the stage in front of an audience, and having that removed and being sort of forced into one place and into one quite different way of songwriting. You know, I was very sort of under the microscope, I suppose. The songs, I was sitting with them very closely, and I wasn't able to share them until they were completely recorded, mixed, mastered, released, you know, in permanent ink. There was no way of changing anything. So it was quite daunting, I suppose, putting an album out like that into the world. But it was, I think it challenged me, and I think it probably made me a better songwriter.
I'd like to play one of your music videos from your latest EP.
Storm to Weather is the feeling of the album, I think, for me.
Excellent. It's very Australian too. You're in the water trying to play the guitar. Let's listen to it.
Love, the night is rolling in. The clouds are getting darker and you're scared of what they bring, and you are searching the horizon for some sign, some little spark of morning that will chase away the dark. Heavy was the winter, love, and what's become of spring? This demon came and got its claws in every little thing. Now there are miles and glass and distance that are keeping me apart from the beating of your strong and steady heart. And if it sinks, my darling, then just close your eyes and think of when you'll be in my arms again. There's a storm here to weather, the thunder's coming near, louder than ever, and we don't know where to steer. And though we can't be together, no matter what, my dear, I will love you forever, and we will dance again next year. I will love you forever, and we will dance again next year. This world is unfamiliar now, it's turned us all around. A sailboat in a hurricane and nothing's bolted down. And whichever way you turn, there is no sanctuary in sight, no path to some safe harbour in the night. But I am sailing right beside you, I am just out of arm's length, willing you remember you are raw of iron strength. And I am hanging my tomorrows on the bones of yesterday, all I can do to make it through today. And when my heart sinks, my darling, then I fill my lungs and I think of when you'll be in my arms again. There's a storm here to weather, the thunder's coming near, louder than ever, and we don't know where to steer. And though we can't be together, no matter what, my dear, I will love you forever, and we will dance again next year. I will love you forever, and we will dance again next year. So best foot first, and hold on fast. Do your worst, this too will pass. And when it does, I'll be there to fill your glass. And there's a storm here to weather.
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 There's a storm here to weather. There's a storm here to weather. The thunder's coming near, louder than ever, and we don't know where to steer. And though we can't be together, no matter what, my dear, I will love you forever, and we will dance again next year. I will love you forever, we will dance again next year. I will love you forever, we will dance again next year. I will love you forever, and we will dance again next year.
I do love your style. It's to describe it, it's folk music. Is that correct?
Yeah, I consider.
Would you describe it that
I
way?
consider myself
Yep.
a folk artist. Yeah.
And now you're here in Australia to tour this particular EP, Connectivity. When you were here in 2020, which cities didn't you get to do?
So we only did quite a short tour in 2020. We did Sydney and Melbourne, and then a few other places along the East Coast. But we didn't get to do Brisbane, which I love. I love Brisbane. And we didn't get to do the Gold Coast and Adelaide. And so this time we're spreading out much more. I'm here for much longer. And we actually have plans to come back in March as well, so that we can do Perth and New Zealand and Port Fairy Folk Festival as well. So Australia is getting more of me than I'm sure it can handle over the next couple of months.
Let's talk about this tour now. You're on Brisbane.
Woodford Folk Festival today. We're heading there in when I've come off the phone, and we're there for 5 days. We have gigs all across the festival, so if you're at Woodford, then you can't miss us. And then we're coming to do Brisbane, Byron Bay, the Gold Coast, and then we fly down to Sydney, and we have Sydney and the Blue Mountains and Canberra is in that little section as well. And then we're down, and then we're across to Adelaide, and then we go down to Tassie. We've got Signet Festival in Tassie, and then a couple of other club shows in Tassie, and then we come up and do Melbourne and Geelong, and then we're back towards New South Wales, and we finish up in Illawarra Folk Festival. So lots and lots packed in.
So you're traveling with your band?
I'm traveling with my wonderful fiddle player, and he's a multi-instrumentalist, and he was on the road with me in 2020. So if you saw me then you'll have met him. His name's Ben Moss, and he's a fantastic musician. So yeah, we have a great time on the road. I'm very lucky to be joined by him.
Which Aussie musician you like or have played with?
I played with some wonderful musicians while I was touring here, but I've never played with my favourite. One of my favourite songwriters actually in the world is an Australian. Who's Darren Hanlon. I'm a massive fan of Darren Hanlon, and I think his work is beautiful, and I think he's an incredibly poetic songwriter. So that's always, that's a big ambition of mine, is to hopefully do some shows with him one day. I don't think he knows me, but I might send him an email.
You never know, because you just joined TikTok.
I just joined TikTok, so maybe Darren Hanlon's on there. Among my followers on there, my media followers on there.
And I read also that you are a comedian. Is that correct? Are you a stand-up comedian in your spare time, or is that something you just do sometimes with somebody?
I do have to call myself a comedian now. Yeah, I did a show at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival last year. So I did a month of comedy shows, no music at all, no guitar, no singing. And I really, really enjoyed it. I've done a lot of work within music as a support act for comedians, and I've worked a lot with the Guilty Feminist podcast, which is a wonderful comedy podcast, which I know is huge in Australia. So I've worked sort of alongside comedians for a long time, and I thought I'd just have a go and see if I can cope without the guitar and if people still find me funny. And I had a really great time. So yeah, I suppose I have to own up and call myself a comedian as well as a musician. Yeah, it feels a bit strange. That's a quite new development in my career.
You have worked with or been on stage with Hannah Gadsby, is that right?
That's right. I did tour support for Hannah Gadsby, both with her last show, Douglas, and her new show, Body of Work. I did tour support in the UK, had a little bit in Amsterdam and Dublin. So, and she's just wonderful. And obviously, you couldn't ask for a better, if you're an aspiring comedian, you couldn't ask for a better comedian to be hanging around with. So had an amazing time on those shows. Just think she's wonderful. Love her to bits.
So is there a particular town that you're looking forward to visit, or area that you're looking forward to
I'm
visit
really
in
looking forward to
Australia?
going to Tasmania. I've never been before, and I've just heard great things. I've got some friends who live in Tasmania, and I'm just really interested to experience like a whole new part of Australia. So yeah, really can't wait to get to Tassie.
Have you had time to go and do something? Like, I'm sure being, touring is fun, but on the other hand, you're visiting Australia,
Yes,
this amazing
fortunately, yeah,
country,
we spent a bit
and
of
you're
time
touring a lot. Will you
yesterday
have time to
up
do
on the
some
beach, up here
sightseeing?
at Queen's Beach, and we managed to have a lovely tour of Brisbane, and the Story Bridge and the Botanical Gardens, and went down to the riverside, and had a gorgeous day exploring Brisbane yesterday. And we do have some days off built in. My girlfriend is here with me as well, which is fantastic. So we're going to get to kind of explore a bit on the days off, which is great because she's never been to Australia before. So showing her the sights.
Fantastic. And then you're back. You mentioned March, which is that in conjunction with World Pride?
It's not. I'm playing Port Fairy Folk Festival in Victoria, and we have a few other shows planned as well for Perth and New Zealand. And then I think the Blue Mountains Festival as well. So that's a fairly quick visit. We'll just be in and out, I think, for about 2 weeks. But I couldn't turn it down. Yeah, I was asked to do Port Fairy, and my agent said to me, "Well, you're just a bit in January, but I love Australia, so I'm never going to turn down an opportunity to go."
Thank you so much, Grace, for joining us and for your conversation.